On the morning of October 14, 1902, 7 people entered the Bitterroot Range through a passage known locally as Carpenter's Trace. None of them were ever seen again. Their names appear in the register at Stevensville, Montana. The handwriting belongs to Thomas Garrett, a timber surveyor employed by the Anaconda Copper Mining Company. He signed for himself, his assistant Paul Hendricks, 2 packers named John Voss and Edward Lim, a cook called Margaret Dalton, and 2 seasonal laborers, brothers from Ontario whose surnames were recorded simply as Bouchard. The group departed with 4 mules, provisions estimated at 3 weeks, and survey equipment valued at approximately $200. Garrett's assignment was straightforward. The company required updated measurements of timber reserves along the western slope before winter made the higher elevations impassable. The work had been delayed twice already due to personnel shortages. Garrett, who had worked for Anaconda for 6 years, had requested the job himself. His reasoning was documented in a letter to the district foreman dated September 29th. He wrote that the standard route, via Lolo Pass, would add 4 days of travel and put them into November before the survey could be completed. Carpenter's Trace, though steeper and less traveled, would save them time. He noted that he had taken the trail once before, in the summer of 1899, and found it passable with care. The foreman's reply has not survived. What exists is a supply requisition form stamped with approval on October 7th. No objection was raised. Garrett's experience was considered sufficient. The weather in early October was mild. Newspaper records from Missoula described clear skies and moderate temperatures. There had been no snow at elevation. The rivers were low. Conditions, by all contemporary accounts, were favorable. Margaret Dalton was 31 years old. She had cooked for survey crews before. Her brother, a ranch hand near Hamilton, later told investigators that she considered the work steady and better paid than domestic service. She did not express concern about the route. Paul Hendricks was 24. He had been hired in July. His previous employment was with a sawmill in Spokane. He kept a journal, portions of which were found in his boarding house after the disappearance. The final entry, dated October 12th, mentions only that he was packing his gear and expected to return by the end of the month. John Voss and Edward Lim were contract packers. Both men were experienced in mountain travel. Lim, who was Chinese, had worked in the mines before turning to packing. Voss had a family in Stevensville. His wife would later testify that he told her the job was routine. The Bouchard brothers left little record. Their first names were not preserved in any document that has been located. They were transient workers, common in the region at the time. It is believed they were between 18 and 25 years old. Thomas Garrett was 42. He was married. He had 2 daughters. His wife kept a photograph of him taken in front of the Anaconda office in 1901. In it, he wears a wool coat and stands with his arms crossed. His expression is calm. On the morning of October 14th, he made the decision to proceed through Carpenter's Trace rather than wait for better maps or additional men. He believed it was the faster option. He believed the weather would hold. He believed he knew the trail. It was this belief that would define everything that followed. Carpenter's Trace was named after a homesteader who had used it to move livestock in the 1870s. By 1902, it was no longer maintained. The Forest Service had not cleared it in at least 5 years. Local guides considered it hazardous after September. Garrett's 1899 passage had occurred in late July. The trail at that time was dry, visible, and free of snow. He had been accompanied by a different crew, all of whom returned safely. His report to Anaconda described the route as expedient for summer access. No mention was made of autumn conditions. The decision to use the trail in October was unusual, but not unprecedented. Records show that other survey teams had traveled through the Bitterroots as late as mid-October in prior years. The risk was understood to be manageable if the weather cooperated. What Garrett may not have known, or chose not to prioritize, was that Carpenter's Trace crossed a drainage basin subject to rapid weather changes. The western slope faced prevailing Pacific storms. Temperature drops of 30 degrees within hours were documented in the region. Snow could accumulate at higher elevations even when valleys remained clear. A report filed by the U.S. Geological Survey in 1898 noted that the drainage between Lolo Peak and the Sleeping Child drainage was subject to sudden and severe autumnal storms. This report was available in the Missoula office. There is no evidence Garrett consulted it. The group's departure was observed by the proprietor of a general store in Stevensville. He later recalled that the men seemed in good spirits. Margaret Dalton purchased additional flour and salted pork. One of the Bouchard brothers asked about the weather forecast. The proprietor said he expected it to stay fair for another week. The mules were loaded with standard equipment: tents, blankets, cooking pots, axes, rope, surveying instruments, rifles for game, and dry goods sufficient for 21 days. Garrett carried a compass and a hand-drawn map, likely copied from his 1899 notes. They left Stevensville at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning. The sky was clear. The temperature was estimated at 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The trail began as a wagon road, then narrowed into a footpath roughly 3 miles west of town. It climbed steadily for the first day, passing through mixed pine and Douglas fir. Water sources were plentiful in the lower elevations. According to statements given by ranchers in the area, the group camped the first night near a creek called Burnt Fork. Smoke from their fire was visible from a homestead 2 miles south. No distress was noted. On the second day, they would have ascended above 6,000 feet. The trail at this point became less distinct. In dry conditions, it could still be followed. In wet or snow-covered terrain, it merged with game paths and rock slides. Garrett's plan, as inferred from his September letter, was to reach the survey area within 3 days, conduct measurements over the course of a week, and return by the same route. Total time, 2 weeks, weather permitting. The plan required the weather to hold. It required the trail to remain passable. It required no injuries, no equipment failures, and no unexpected delays. It required everything to go as expected. There is no evidence that Garrett informed anyone of an alternate route in case conditions worsened. There is no record of a contingency plan. He proceeded with the confidence of a man who had done this before. The exact moment cannot be reconstructed with certainty. What exists are fragments. A notation in the district foreman's log, dated October 13th, records that Garrett's crew was en route via Carpenter's trace as planned. This was not first-hand observation. It was assumed based on the departure schedule. The last confirmed sighting of the group occurred on the evening of October 15th. A trapper named Henry Good, traveling south from the Sleeping Child drainage, encountered the party near a ridge he identified as the saddle above Sweeney Creek. In his later testimony to the county sheriff, Good stated that the group appeared to be making camp. He exchanged brief words with one of the men, whom he believed to be Garrett. Good recalled that the weather at that elevation was colder than expected. He mentioned wind. He said he told the man he spoke with that snow was possible within a day or two. The man thanked him and said they planned to complete the survey quickly. Good continued south. He reached Darby 2 days later. He thought nothing more of the encounter until weeks afterward. Weather records from Missoula show that on October 16th, a cold front moved across western Montana. Temperatures dropped sharply. Precipitation began in the valleys by mid-morning. At higher elevations, this would have fallen as snow. By the evening of October 16th, ranchers near Stevensville reported snow accumulation of 2 to 3 inches. At 6,000 feet and above, accumulation would have been considerably greater. If Garrett's group was camped near Sweeney Creek on the night of October 15th, they would have been at approximately 6,500 feet. The storm would have reached them by dawn. No further sightings were recorded. It is here that the decision must be considered. Garrett had 3 options. He could have turned back immediately upon noticing the weather change. He could have sheltered in place and waited for the storm to pass. Or he could have pressed forward, believing the survey site was close and that completing the work quickly would allow them to descend before conditions worsened. There is no journal entry, no witness, no written record of what he chose or why. But the group did not return to Stevensville. They did not descend to lower elevations where rescue would have been simpler, and they were not found at the survey site. This suggests they attempted to continue. Carpenter's Trace, above 6,000 feet, follows a series of switchbacks along a steep ridgeline. In summer, the trail is narrow but manageable. In snow, especially fresh snow without prior tracks, it becomes difficult to distinguish from the surrounding terrain. There are places where the trail runs within feet of drop-offs exceeding 100 feet. There are sections where rock slides have altered the route since it was last maintained. There are stretches where the forest is dense enough to obscure landmarks. If the group proceeded into the storm, they would have been navigating in reduced visibility, with snow accumulating underfoot, and with mules that were likely struggling with footing. Garrett's 1899 map would have been useless. Landmarks visible in summer would have been invisible in a snowstorm. It is probable that he believed he could reach the survey area before the worst of the weather arrived. It is probable that he underestimated the speed of the storm. It is probable that he trusted his memory of the trail more than the evidence in front of him. These are probabilities, not certainties. What is certain is that at some point after October 15th, the group left the trail, or the trail left them. Whether they became lost, whether they sought shelter, whether they attempted to backtrack or pressed forward, these questions have no definitive answers. What is known is that they did not emerge. The decision, whatever it was made in the cold, and the wind and the snow. It was made by a man who had been entrusted with the safety of 6 other people. It was made with incomplete information and mounting pressure. It was a decision shaped by experience, by confidence, by the desire to complete the job. And it was irreversible. The first inquiry came on October 29th. Garrett's wife contacted the Anaconda office when her husband failed to return by the expected date. The company sent a telegram to Stevensville. The response confirmed that the group had not been seen since their departure 2 weeks prior. A search party was organized on November 1st. Volunteers from Stevensville, along with company men and local guides, entered the Bitterroots with the intent of following Carpenter's trace to the survey site. By this time, snow had fallen repeatedly. Accumulation at higher elevations was reported at over 2 feet. Temperatures had dropped below freezing. The trail was impassable in several locations. The searchers reached Sweeney Creek on November 3rd. They found no signs of a camp, no equipment, no tracks. The snow had erased everything. They continued as far as the ridgeline above the creek, then were forced to turn back due to worsening conditions. One of the guides stated that attempting to proceed further would be suicidal. A second search was conducted in late November. This effort focused on the drainage below the trail, on the theory that the group may have attempted to descend through the forest to reach the valley floor. No evidence was found. In December, the county sheriff formally declared the case a disappearance. He noted in his report that the terrain and weather made recovery unlikely until spring. Spring searches began in May 1903. Volunteers, family members, and hired guides combed the area for weeks. They found scattered remains of a campfire at a location approximately a mile south of Sweeney Creek. The site was heavily degraded. No tools, no personal effects, no human remains. In July 1903, a hunter discovered a mule skeleton in a ravine roughly 2 miles west of Carpenter's Trace. The animal had fallen from a significant height. Whether it belonged to Garrett's party could not be confirmed. No other discoveries were made that year. In 1904, Margaret Dalton's brother hired a private guide to search the sleeping child drainage. They found nothing. In 1906, a prospector reported seeing fabric and metal debris near a rockslide east of the trail. By the time investigators arrived, the site had been disturbed by animals. Nothing identifiable remained. John Voss's wife continued to place notices in regional newspapers until 1910. She received no credible responses. Anaconda Copper closed the case in 1905. The company paid death benefits to Garrett's widow. The other families received smaller settlements. The incident was noted in internal reports as a cautionary example of inadequate route planning. In 1912, the U.S. Forest Service formally decommissioned Carpenter's Trace. The trail was removed from official maps. The disappearance entered local memory as a story of bad luck and bad weather. Over time, details blurred. Names were forgotten. The number of people involved became uncertain in retellings, but the fundamental fact remained. 7 people had entered the mountains with a plan and a deadline. They had made a choice about which path to take, and that choice had led them somewhere from which there was no return. In 1958, a Forest Service crew clearing deadfall near the headwaters of Sweeney Creek found fragments of surveying equipment buried under decades of soil and pine needles. The items were corroded beyond identification. They were catalogued and stored in a regional archive in Missoula. No connection to the 1902 disappearance was made at the time. In 1973, a historian researching early copper industry labor practices came across Garrett's personnel file in the Anaconda Company records. The file contained his September 29th letter requesting the assignment. It contained the supply requisition. It contained a brief notation of his disappearance and the closure of the case. The historian noted the incident in a footnote. It attracted no further attention. In 1984, a hiker reported finding a rusted iron buckle and a piece of rotted leather near a rock slide on the western slope of the Bitterroots. The location was roughly consistent with the area Garrett's group would have passed through. The items were collected by a local museum, but never analyzed. In 2001, a graduate student in Missoula wrote a thesis on turn-of-the-century wilderness navigation practices. She included a chapter on the Garrett disappearance. Her research located goods testimony, newspaper accounts, and fragments of the search reports. She concluded that Garrett had likely underestimated the risks associated with late-season mountain travel, and that his decision to use Carpenter's trace, while not reckless by the standards of the time, reflected overconfidence in his prior experience. She noted that none of the 7 people in the party had a say in the route selection. Their survival depended entirely on Garrett's judgment. Her thesis was filed in the university library. It has been accessed 11 times. The Bitterroot Range remains largely as it was in 1902. Trails have been improved, maps are more accurate, communication technology has reduced the isolation, but the fundamental calculus of risk has not changed. Every year, people enter the mountains with plans. They rely on experience, on equipment, on their assessment of the weather and the terrain. They make decisions based on incomplete information and the pressure of time. Most of them return. Thomas Garrett believed he knew the trail. He believed the weather would hold. He believed he could complete the job and bring everyone home safely. He was wrong on all counts. But his error was not unique. It was not the product of negligence or malice. It was the product of ordinary human confidence meeting extraordinary conditions. The mountains do not require malice to be fatal. They require only a single miscalculation. On October 14, 1902, Thomas Garrett made that miscalculation. 6 other people paid the price alongside him. Their graves, if they exist, have never been found. Carpenter's trace is still visible in places if you know where to look. The forest has reclaimed most of it. The old route is faint, overgrown, indistinguishable from the land around it. But it is there, and somewhere along that path or near it, 7 people stopped moving forward. The record ends where the snow began.